Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are here today to talk about content area instruction for English learners. We are in Chapter 10 of Foundations for Teaching English Language Learners by Wayne E. Wright. So let's begin. So English learners are capable of learning academic content while still developing their proficiency in English whenever our instruction is specifically designed for them. So English learners do face the challenge of learning a new language, learning the domains, listening, speaking, reading, and writing, at the same time that they're expected to meet grade level academic content standards alongside their English speaking peers. So the school system is not set up for students to be proficient in English before learning academic content, and it should not be, because we know that high quality sheltered content area instruction supports English language development for our students. So we look at differentiated instruction. We know that all students differ in their prior knowledge, their academic proficiency, learning styles, and sociocultural backgrounds. So a one-size-fits-all to instruction is very problematic, especially for a diverse group like English learners. So when classrooms have a large range of diversity in students' backgrounds, linguistic abilities, academic proficiency, teachers should not provide students with the same curricular materials, lessons, and instruction. We have to think of them individually when we think about how we're going to modify and adapt our materials and assessments. So teachers tailor their instruction to meet the unique language and academic needs of each student. Thus, they're providing differentiated instruction. Effective teachers know their students, and they also use formative assessment to continually monitor the language and academic needs that are related to the instructional goals. As educators, we use this information to differentiate instruction so that our English learners can achieve academically and also continue to develop the English they need for academic success. So our first guiding question today is, why is it important for sheltered instruction to include both content and language objectives? So sheltered instruction lessons include both language and content objectives, reflecting the fact that content area instruction is also language instruction for English learners. Remember that sheltered content area instruction supports but does not replace ESL instruction. So when teaching content to English learners, teachers focus on helping all students understand the concepts and help English learners to learn the language necessary to communicate with others when accomplishing academic tasks related to that content area concept. Note that the content area objectives are the same for all students, English learners as well as native English speakers. So we're asking the students to learn the same content area. We're not asking them to learn different content than the native English speaking peers. Note that all the language objectives direct attention to the language of the content area. So we're focusing on what key vocabulary do they need to know? What genres and registers do the students need to learn to be successful in the classroom? The language objectives will need to be differentiated according to the student's English language proficiency and literacy levels. So first, as teachers, we have to clearly define what are the content and language objectives. The content objective describes what the students will need to learn during the lesson, and the language objectives describe how the students will learn this content. So they determine which of the 4 language domains, listening, speaking, reading, or writing, the students will need to accomplish learning the objective. Language objectives are based on the ELP level of the student. So we look at the ELP standards of the WIDA Consortia along with our individual states, PA, to guide both English language development instruction and academic content area instruction. WIDA includes specific standards focused on the language English learners need to communicate, the information, ideas, and concepts necessary for academic success in the content area of language arts, math, science, and social studies. Recall that the various ELP standards and progressions provide descriptions and examples of observable language behaviors that English learners at differing English language proficiency levels can demonstrate in the classroom. So let's look at an example of a fourth grade science lesson. So the content area standard that we're focusing on is from Pennsylvania, and it is to identify various earth structures, including mountains, faults, drainage basins, through the use of models. So the content area objective, which will be the same for all students in the classroom, is to identify Earth's structures with the use of models. Now, focusing more narrowly on language for our English learners, we're asking the students to explain the Earth's features by talking about the models with a partner. So now down below, I have the WIDA consortium chart for levels 1 to 5. Remember that 1 is our newcomer or entering students, all the way up to 5 are our bridging students who are getting closer and closer to that 6.0 of attaining English proficiency. So looking at this objective, I will explain the Earth's features by talking about the models with a partner. I can see that the student is probably somewhere in the 4 or 5 range. So let's look down at level 5 to explain physical characteristics of landforms using pictures and technical vocabulary. I've included the standards here for you, the PA Common Core, the PA standards for English language development, and also the WIDA Can-Do descriptors for you to take a look. So thinking about how we can modify text and instructional materials, that is a very important role for English language teachers in our schools. So most grade level content area curricular materials were not developed with English learners in mind. So therefore, we need to make modifications to make grade level content accessible to our students. So strategies for modifying text in textbooks include outlining, using graphic organizers, rewriting the text in simplified English, and reading it aloud to students. When we do this, we need to pause to paraphrase, to explain, or to provide examples to help English learners understand the meaning. I always like to have an iPad next to me or a tablet to be able to show the students examples and visuals and videos whenever there's a new vocabulary word that we need to understand. So there's a growing trend among publishers of textbook companies to address the needs of English learners. For example, some teachers' guides include suggestions for modifying content and activities to make the learning more comprehensible for English learners. Some publishers also provide separate supplemental materials in simplified English or in other languages. So just as an example, here is an English learner's teacher's guide. This is for the company is Open Court, grade level 4. Caution and professional judgment must be exercised with these resources. So teachers need to have adequate training to know how to use these materials. We can't just pop down this huge book and expect teachers to just carry it out without any support. Our next guiding question is, what are the benefits of an integrated thematic approach to content area instruction for English learners? So to ensure coverage of all content areas, teachers can consider using thematic teaching. So this is selecting a theme that can be explored through all content areas. Of course, this is much more easily done in the elementary grades. So for younger students, the theme could be a topic such as Hello Neighbor, where we're focused on community, or Everything Changes, where we're focused on the natural world. For older students, themes can be more broad and abstract, such as change or inequality. Thematic teaching allows for easy crossover among the content areas. So, for example, if we're doing a science lesson on weather, we can incorporate elements that the students are also learning in math, art, and writing by having students record the temperature every day, drawing pictures to illustrate the weather, and also writing about which day they felt had the best weather in their journals. Thematic teaching provides and builds on students' background knowledge and thus facilitates comprehensible input. So if students learn new vocabulary and concepts about the weather in this example through science instruction, they will understand more when they talk about and read about the weather in the content areas. Teachers can use a template to plan thematic lessons, filling in simple ideas for each lesson and each content area, and then we can share that with the teaching team. Although grade level textbooks are typically written at a level that's inaccessible to English learners to read independently, teachers can find other books dealing with the same concepts at more accessible reading levels. They can read books to students aloud, or they can also use them for shared and guided reading to reinforce and further develop content area knowledge. Both fiction text and nonfiction text with content area themes are appropriate. Oftentimes, I utilize Carnegie Library's resources for teachers and pull books based on our theme so that there's a large variety of fiction and nonfiction books in the classroom. For older English learners, teachers may be tempted to use the content area textbook from lower grade levels. So for instance, if you have newcomer ELLs in ninth grade who are just learning English, you might be tempted to pull a fourth or fifth grade book. Teachers have to use professional judgment in using lower level text because students are capable of grade level work with appropriate scaffolds. So we never ever want to put something down in front of a student that says that it's from a lower grade level. They know, trust me, and it is not a kind thing to do to them because they are able to do grade level work. We just have to simplify the language and teach the language to make it accessible. So teachers should look for books and other materials that deal with the realities of students' lives and the diverse communities in which they live, thinking about how we can pull in the students' stories into what we're teaching. Our next guiding question is, what do the languages of mathematics, science, and social studies include, and who is responsible for teaching them? So teachers can shelter their instruction to make math, science, and social studies comprehensible to English learners in their classes. Teachers should consider the following when they shelter and differentiate content area instruction for linguistically and culturally diverse learners. They should consider the language of the content area, how to make instruction comprehensible to English learners, how to modify instructional materials, how to use literature, and also integrate students' cultures. So math learning is cumulative, and basic concepts have to be mastered before students can learn more advanced concepts. So when we're thinking about mathematics, it's imperative that English learners receive comprehensible math instruction to avoid falling far behind their grade level peers. A major misconception about math is that it is easy for English learners because it's mostly numbers. So research, and I'm sure your own experience in the math classroom, shows that math tests have a high language demand and pose significant difficulties for English learners. There is a need for an expanded view of academic literacy and mathematics and include mathematical proficiency, mathematical practices, and also mathematical discourses. Educators and researchers have analyzed that the language of math has its own unique vocabulary, syntax, and also unique semantic properties and text features. So let's look at a few examples. Words are taught that are rarely used outside of math, such as divisor, denominator, and quotient. Many common words that have specific meaning in math contexts, such as table, column, and face, apply to that mathematical concept, but the student may already know that from another context, and that creates confusion. So terms may have different meanings within math, such as square, for example, square shape, the square root of 4, and the square root of 4. So you see the different symbols. Homonyms of math terms such as sum, so sum adding two numbers together, and plane. So you see the different spellings there of plane, Plane, versus plain PLAIN. So imagine if the teacher is teaching and saying the word over and over again, but not providing a visual or the word written down for the student to see what confusion that could cause. The use of multiple words for the same mathematical idea is very difficult. So teachers throw out these different terms. One example is when we're talking about adding numbers together. They may use addition, add, plus, sum. They all mean the same thing, and you're asking the student to do the same thing, but does the student understand and know all of those words and their meanings? Also, it entails a unique set of complex phrases, such as least common multiple and negative exponent. So again, imagine the confusion that an English learner feels when the teacher says, look at the table to find the answers. So I've included a link here. This is a video that I love. It's called Moises in Math Class. And I encourage you to watch it to understand from his experience as a newcomer English learner, what he is imagining when the teacher is teaching the class. Mathematical texts are dense and conceptually packed, so they require first to read left to right and must be read more slowly than natural language texts and often several times to understand their meaning. So think of the cognitive load for our students of having to reread many times to truly understand what the text is trying to say. Often mathematical texts are crowded with symbols and notations that convey precise mathematical meaning and content. Math information is also often presented in tables, charts, graphs, and other visual representations that we have to teach the students how to read and interpret. Word problems can be particularly challenging because they can contain complex syntax and difficult and sometimes irrelevant vocabulary. So solving word problems correctly requires vocabulary knowledge and also English reading comprehension skills. English learners who are highly skilled in math will have difficulty demonstrating those skills until they attain enough proficiency to handle the linguistic demands of math instruction and assessment in English. In word problems, some of the contextual information may be new or unknown to English learners. So for example, I worked with a fifth grade student this year coming from Japan who had far beyond grade level ability in math. However, he really needed a lot of support in the math classroom to understand the tasks of what the teacher was asking them to do, to be able to read the math textbook and carry out the work. So even though he could do the work, he really needed those linguistic scaffolds in the math classroom. So let's think about some cultural considerations in math class. A challenge for newcomer ELLs is that they may have learned math symbols and algorithms for solving problems in their home country that differ from those that are taught in the United States. So just one example is the use of a decimal to separate place value and the comma that's used to separate numbers. So for example, in the United States, we use the comma with a decimal point to show the number is less than a whole number. In other countries, that's done in a different way. In most other countries, the use of mental math is valued. And so whenever English learners come with strong math skills from their home country, they may find it tedious or unnecessary to show their work, which is something we continuously ask students to do. So many times I see students writing down their work, they get to the answer and they go back and they erase it. In the US, no, leave it there. The teacher wants to see how you got to that answer. Other cultural differences may affect math instruction for English learners. So students may be coming with knowledge of the metric system and find us in the US not using the metric system to be extremely confusing. Also, learning a new money system is very challenging. So an effective approach for teachers is to help students connect math to their own family's lives. also to their community and the world at large. So making connections also to their home countries. So to help students learn vocabulary and language structures for math, teachers can do many things. They can make illustrated math word charts that go along with their units to describe important terms such as geometric shapes or measurement words. They can use word charts with the students during shared or modeled writing. They can include resources, and I see this a lot. Students using number lines, 100 charts, calendars, coins, clocks, a list of ordinal numbers, a chart to skip count by twos, fives, and tens, math facts, using clue words for problem solving to signal correct operation. So those resources would be at the student's desk, and they're able to pull them out and use them whenever they know they need to access them during classroom practice. And some teachers do allow use of those during assessments. Teachers can provide visual support, and I'd say that's the key way to really support students in math. Give them as many visuals as you can and offer opportunities for daily practice. So we also can promote hands-on practice with manipulatives, pattern blocks, sorting. There are many, many ways to make math hands-on. Okay, now we're switching to science in the content area and how we're going to teach this language. So science has always been a popular subject for sheltered instruction because it provides tangible concepts and processes that facilitate hands-on learning. So students are typically naturally curious about the way things work in the world, and this can be used to our benefit. English learners develop a shared repertoire of resources, so they all will be using science notebooks, for example, and also practices, so developing models, for an example, to advance their goals in the learning community. As learners, they build on each other's ideas and co-construct scientific understanding, and they also engage in the types of purposeful interactions that promote language learning. The language of science, of course, can be confusing for English learners because, like math, it uses many words that are specific to science, but are used in everyday life and that have different meanings. So English learners use different language functions that are often unique to science. To be successful in doing so, students need to ask questions and form hypotheses just as scientists do. Students need to learn how to make predictions and come up with explanations. They design experiments, collect data, identify and manipulate variables, record results, and draw conclusions. So in asking students to move through the scientific process, students collaborate with others in the group. They communicate their findings in the genre of science reports. Sometimes even oral reports of scientific findings are expected to use specific language forms. So all students, including English learners, must learn new concepts and content-specific vocabulary, which is typically Tier 3 in science. So English learners have less experience with the genre and register expected in their science assignments. So one specific challenge of writing is lab reports. So this is a specific genre required using a unique discourse style and textual structure that we have to teach explicitly to students. So we can make science instruction comprehensible in a variety of ways. We use inquiry-based or discovery science because this is an effective means for helping English learners successfully learn concepts and also develop language. Inquiry-based science includes the process that is at the heart of science instruction: observing, classifying, predicting, interpreting results, formulating hypotheses, controlling variables, defining operations, and experimenting. Hands-on activities provide rich language opportunities for students to explore real-world experiences and also use purposeful language in a meaningful context. Students will learn a concept if they experience it and also discover it rather than just reading about it. So we want to make science learning come alive as best we can. Teachers can make modifications by rewriting part of the text into simplified English and also using supplemental science textbooks that are designed for English learners. Okay, now switching gears to social studies. So social studies is an essential part of a complete education. We see that social studies is not typically a tested area in many of our grade levels, so it can be less focused on and given less time in the instructional day. But we know that social studies is a broad label for covering many important topics. So the disciplines of social studies include anthropology, archaeology, economics, geography, history, law, philosophy, political science, psychology, religion, and sociology. So social studies teaches students about extremely important topics: culture, time, continuity and change, people, places, environment, individual development and identity, individuals, groups, and institutions, power, authority, and governance, production, distribution, and consumption, science, technology, and society, global connections, and civic ideals and practices. The language of social studies possesses unique challenges for English learners. Unlike the language of science, for which most of that language describes something tangible or observable, social studies deals largely with abstractions. So think about concepts such as government, law, democracy, freedom, rights, justice, poverty, immigration, and elections. We can't easily illustrate this with a drawing. And we can't really oftentimes just give it one simple definition. So think of terms such as American Revolution, slavery, westward expansion, and the Trail of Tears. These are all abstractions of very complex events or chains of events that students need to have significant background knowledge to understand. So these abstractions carry a very heavy semantic load and require substantial background knowledge to understand, and also substantial language skills to be able to have discourse about social studies. Many terms in social studies education are culturally contextualized and thus have very specific meanings within the United States. So such culturally embedded examples will be more familiar or comprehensible to English speakers that are born in the United States. So teaching key vocabulary to English learners in social studies is much more involved than it is in other areas. So I have to say, supporting social studies classrooms can be very challenging, especially when students come in high school and are expected to have background knowledge coming from elementary and middle school to understand concepts. So we can make social studies instruction comprehensible in a variety of ways. The language of social studies focuses on abstract concepts, but the field itself offers a wide variety of visuals that can help make instruction more comprehensible. So we can pull portraits of people, photographs of places, drawings, photographs, or video clips of historical or contemporary events. And these can all go a long way in helping students comprehend concepts if they can see it, if it can become alive. An essential consideration in making social studies instruction comprehensible for English learners is to find out what students already know about the particular topic or concept that's being taught. So we have to assess what is their prior knowledge of this topic and what do they need to know to understand new information. So we can use things such as a KWL chart here. Social studies enables students to explore current events and the history behind them, and also to understand the way that these events affect them, their families, and their communities. So even for students pulling ELA news, news articles that are on their reading level will do a lot to help them to connect to current events. Now switching gears again to art, music, and PE. So art, music, and physical education or PE have been limited in schools where instruction focuses narrowly on preparing English learners and other students for high stakes tests. This is similar to social studies. So the trend is of great concern for educators because these content areas are crucial in providing students a well-rounded education. So to deny English learners and other students of arts instruction is to deny them the opportunity to become educated. The arts can be used as a means of reflection, higher order thinking, expression, and communication, and also help students to develop skills that will later be needed in their workplace. So additionally, physical education is an essential component of a complete education for all children. Rates of childhood obesity are higher for children from families of low socioeconomic status and disproportionately affect our Latinx and Black students. So, the key to resolving this crisis is to engage students in understanding how to adopt and maintain healthier patterns of eating and exercises. And we need to do this through showing them through experiential learning. Despite the wide recognition in the US of the obesity crisis, more and more schools are reducing their PE programs, giving teachers less time. So, because art, music, and PE typically carry less of a language demand than math, science, and social studies, English learners can often participate in them more easily and quickly excel in them from the beginning of their time coming to a US school. Artistic, musical, and physical talents easily transcend language barriers. Strengths that students bring to school can be built on immediately. So students feel successful. They may go through their whole day feeling very stressed because of the cognitive load placed on them in academic classes, and they need that outlet of art or music class or PE to feel successful. As with other content areas, there are specific ways of using language associated with art, music, and PE, as well as content, concepts, and theories beyond the surface level activities of these subjects that require students to have higher English language proficiency to comprehend. So teachers can make instruction in these content areas more comprehensible for English learners with supportive literature and also the use of other strategies that were suggested from math, science, and social studies. So when we think about assessing students' work in the content areas, teachers must ensure that the assessment is a valid measure of the student's knowledge of content and not just a measure of their language proficiency. So for example, giving students a math test consisting only of word problems on measurement may be more a test of the student's English reading comprehension skills than of their math knowledge and skills of measurement. Performance assessments and other forms of alternative assessment should mirror the activities students do when learning in each content area. I tell that to teachers all the time. If the students are able to show you what they know in the same way that they learned how to do it, you'll be able to understand, did they learn that concept? Did they learn how to carry out that skill? The following examples share what levels 1 to 2 on the WIDA standards of English learners can do. So for example, in science class, students understand different cycles, such as the water cycle. And we can ask students to arrange pictures depicting each stage of the water cycle in the correct sequence. In social studies, students can make a map of their neighborhood, and we can use a rubric with simplified language that shows them, does this map include a house, school, street, library, or park? Does it include a key and a scale and a compass rose? So these types and other types of performance assessments remove the language barriers and allow students to show what they know and what they can do. The language objectives associated with each content area should be assessed using both informal and formal assessment measures. Teachers should use ongoing alternative and authentic assessments along with formal assessments to ensure that students have multiple measures of their knowledge and skills. So thank you today for your engagement. In class 13, we will be discussing advocacy for English learners. So please contact me whenever you would like to discuss anything we're reading, anything that you're writing or thinking about, or any other matter. Thank you so much.